Boy, yeah, I managed to meet up with you face to face. It wasn't exactly just before COVID, but it may as well be. The longer time goes
That's
on, the more
true. I
it's
think it was kind of
essentially
just
just
before
before
COVID.
COVID. Uh, yeah, well, it was 2019 though, right? It was yeah, I hung out with Rachel Haywire something like September of last year, I believe, just
Okay,
about a
boy, it
year
was
ago.
that long ago. You know what? I bet you're right. It was just when the weather was just starting to turn cold, I feel like.
Yeah, it's hard to say. It was nighttime, San Francisco, outer mission. Yeah, it's a little hard to tell what time of year it is. The microclimate thing and the intensity of San Francisco winter and fog. It's not as much in play as it used to be. It's sort of a little bit the same all the time now compared. A friend of mine, a mentor of mine back when I was in school, Jeffrey Friedman, he's the editor of
Hmm.
this journal, Critical Review. He lived in Berkeley in the '80s, and he said it was foggy a lot, and it's I never see that anymore. So
That's exactly what
anyway,
I've heard from people who longtime Bay Area folks. It used to be way foggier, apparently. So it's
yeah,
interesting.
I grew up in Sacramento. I was in Sacramento in the '80s, and like every few winters, it would flood very badly. I remember walking to the bus
Really?
stop as a kid, people's lawns. I couldn't walk on the sidewalk; it was flooded. I'm walking across people's lawns to the bus stop, and then now it's unfathomable. That much rain.
Wow. Yes, seriously. Yeah, I lived out in Sac for about 7 years before I moved to the Bay Area, and I don't think it flooded once. Although I heard stories about that. I did hear tale of the city flooding.
Yeah, there was some major floods up through the '90s. There was a big one in '95, and now it's just hardly ever gets enough rain to imagine that happening. And like most of the climate change, most of it has been in the form of winters being milder. Summers seem about as hot as they've always been, but winters don't get as cold, as foggy, and as rainy as they used to be.
So
That's
you're
what
still
I
in
feel.
Oakland, right?
Yeah, I've been in Oakland for about 10 years now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Oakland's
Actually,
pretty clutch. I mean, weather-wise.
yeah. So, how have you been since Corona? I know you
I
live in
mean,
another part.
pretty good. I mean, I've been working from home since uh, April or May or whenever, and it was the sort of thing where they just keep pushing it back. Right now, I'm work from home until um, January 4th. They're probably going to keep pushing it back. I work for the state right now,
Yeah, yeah, I
and
recall
they're
that.
being like super cautious. They're being super, super cautious. But I've still like my one project I've been working on since stuck at home and all this sort of a thing. Uh, I kind of I do a lot of writing, but I also have a little bit of a I do some screenwriting, and I've sold a couple of screenplays, and
Oh,
invariably
wow.
the movie just never gets made. And so I'd sold the script to
Yeah.
some guys in San Jose pre-COVID, and when coronavirus came along, it derailed the whole project, and it was really frustrating for me. So I'm like, you know what? I'm like get some friends together. I'm gonna write a script, and I'm gonna like film a movie, because why not? So I got two friends. I wrote a script over
Oh,
about a
wow.
month, and we just finished filming this thing last weekend, and it's been a really fun project just to like get together with just like two friends, I think, and like two other people in it, but mostly me and two friends, and we have like a full like biohacking film that we totally just were able to put together just in the course of hanging out at each other's apartments basically, and a couple of outdoor shots. But it was kind of a cool project to pass the weird weekends.
Yeah, the way you said biohacking, that sounds like it's conducive to a movie that looks a bit like Unfriended. Have you seen that? Or like these very sort of like much of the film is just screenshots, of people, computers, and webcam,
I'm gonna
interactions
I'm
and stuff.
gonna I'm gonna Google that. I feel like I should know what that is. Cool.
I mean, I wouldn't call it a cottage industry, I guess, but over the last few years, there's been sort of like thrillers and horror movies aimed at a younger audience, and much of the action is like online, really.
Yeah, no, I mean that's
Um,
kind of what it is. There is a whole
sounds like
subgenre of like no budget films. And the thing is that's kind of inspiring is most of them are really terrible. Like the whole no budget film genre, it's all pretty shitty, like bad acting, just what you would kind of expect.
yeah,
And
this
the bar to me is kind of low. So I was like, I could do this.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's funny. When you said you'd film the movie, I was going to ask, is it anything related to that Singularity Survival Guide? It sounds like it's somewhat in the wheelhouse, actually. It's a biohacking.
Yeah, it's somewhat similar in the sense that it toes the line between being serious and being over the top comical. It's a little bit like that. It's like a dark comedy, but it has some pertinence to real life at the same time. It's kind of sort of inspired by Josiah Zayner, the guy in Oakland who's in the Unnatural Selection Netflix
Oh,
documentary. You remember this guy?
Jaron Lanier, the virtual
Uh,
reality Godfather.
Oh,
Or what?
so their names sound familiar, I guess, but
Oh,
Josiah Zayner.
okay. Okay.
He's a guy like he runs a biohacking company where he will send you in the mail a CRISPR kit, so you can like do CRISPR like in your garage yourself. And it's like $100 kit. It's kind of a cool operation that he's got going. And he, just put together his own little like coronavirus vaccine, and like he has a video on YouTube of him like injecting himself with it, just for science. He's not like crazy about it, but just for science. So my movie takes that character and then makes it so that it gets pretty crazy. There were so many different ways that you could just like have fun with that, and I had fun with some of those
Yeah.
things you could just imagine.
So would something like 23andMe be considered biohacking? What's the difference? One is merely giving information. The other allows you to somehow interfere in your own biological processes.
Yeah, so 23andMe just kind of wants to, yeah, basically just unpack some information that's stored within inside of you, and biohacking
Okay.
wants to, give you the ability to change that information. I mean, fundamentally through something like CRISPR, although it's kind of a sloppy, messy term because there's a guy who does like bulletproof coffee or something like this, and he's into biohacking in the sense of just like eating a healthy diet, knowing when to go to sleep, how much sleep to get, kind of like hacking your body so that you live to the most effectiveness your biology
Well,
as it is can allow you to. That to me is I just feel like he's kind of just trying to make
being
money
a bit
necessarily.
sounds like it might be being a bit artful with the term biohacking. That just sounds like living well or something.
I
Just
think so too. I think so too.
drink
Yeah.
a lot of water, get 8 hours of sleep, kind of thing. Right?
100%. I feel like that world, that side of it is fairly overrated.
Yeah. The term hack has been used and abused to such a degree now. I mean, life hack. Turns out a life hack is just ways to save money on a riding lawnmower by outfitting a non-riding lawnmower or something. So
Right.
that term life hack has been used a lot for
You
many
know, I
purposes.
wrote an article last year about the term singularity in the very similar sense that it's just kind of become a marketing gimmick that someone will attach the singularity, this or whatever, and it's like a financial firm or something, So, but the term sounds
Yeah,
so good that you just attach it to your new company, and then that
yeah,
helps you get some product sales apparently.
yeah. The new Merrill Lynch singularity. Ask your
Right,
local
right, exactly.
even superficial playful knowledge. Yeah. Well, so I see you reposted that VR piece that you did for Areo, a new decadent movement that will be spurred along by compelling VR. You
Mhm.
want to talk about that? Cool.
Yeah, so I had this idea for this article when I was, and this is all part of the article, but when I was kind of reflecting upon this old French novel called Against Nature by this author Huysmans, and he kind of kicked off the
Oh,
decadent movement. And
okay.
the concept of decadence is it's really interesting because like if something is decadent, like I don't know about you, but like in my mind, I picture like a frilly French pastry that just has a lot going on with it, and you're like, oh, that's decadent. I just want to
Yeah.
sink my teeth into this decadent pastry. So it has like this good connotation, but if you look up the term decadent, it's kind of synonymous with the fall of society because people become too self-indulged or something like this. So it's kind of like this
Yeah.
really negative connotation. And so that makes it a really interesting term just to write about as a jumping off point for an article about modern society. And so, I mean, it just mapped perfectly onto this idea of abandoning reality for living in a virtual space. And so there was this guy, Jack Wilmot, who lived in virtual reality for a week. He had like the headset on, and he showered in it. Like he had a contraption so he could shower. He would eat in the thing. Like he literally lived 24 hours a day in a virtual reality headset. And that is like the pinnacle of decadence. So that old French novel that Huysmans wrote, it's about just experiencing artificiality. He lists how to have a good life, and it's like smelling perfume. You don't need flowers, smell perfume. Or you don't need flowers at all. Like fill your apartment with plastic flowers. Plastic flowers, he said, are the pinnacle of art. So like this artificiality thing is just like, a concept that did become popularized through this novel and because of other authors like Oscar Wilde and people like this who really started to run with this. And the modern idea is people who want to ditch the online world and just live an analog lifestyle. They're like anti-decadent. They just want the real life experience. Whereas someone like Jack Wilmot, who wants to live just in a virtual artificial space, that's like decadence. And so right now, as virtual reality becomes more prominent, we're just gonna kind of wait and see. Does modern society become more decadent in the sense of becoming more and more virtual, more and more artificial, or do we kind of fight against that and become more analog? And it's gonna, especially with the new generation, the people like the Gen Z folks, they might not even see a difference between VR life and analog life at some level. I mean, it's gonna be pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I would think that if you're sort of a trad type, you would be, I would think, a little bit thrown off by the fact that, so much of what was once considered decadent is now just par for the course in everyday life. And in fact, this VR thing, this VR life, that's decadent. But that's decadent because so far we associate it with rich boys and their toys, right? But, cable, Netflix and a Domino's pizza is decadent, but it's also common. So, it doesn't have quite the same stigma, but it's funny, that article feels like it could have been written, or would have been somewhat more impactful, that word, during coronavirus, right?
True.
Retreating VR. Unfortunately, we're not far enough along with VR yet for that to be a compelling way to kill time during coronavirus. There's a small number of people, higher income so far, who can do it. It hasn't really penetrated too far into our consciousness as a way of dealing with being indoors and sort of cut off from folks during coronavirus.
Right. I mean, I do think that it's going to be very interesting to see. I mean, I have a young niece who's 7, and she is, I mean, just it's amazing how naturally she takes up anything involving a screen on a phone. And that's her at 7. Maybe a decade from now, it might not be a screen on a phone. It might be glasses with augmented reality or straight up virtual reality that when the parents want to ignore their kid for 20 minutes, they might be popping into a headset. That's pretty easy to imagine. And if you're 7 years old, just hopping into VR whenever your mom wants to take a break from parenting, you're gonna have a different, literally different view of what reality is. And I mean, that's to me, that's exciting. Because we've done everything else. We've done analog life in all of its iterations for thousands of years. This is actually kind of a new space where we're kind of maybe actually de-emphasizing the importance of the meat suit, the human body, and instead emphasizing just cognition, just pure brain shit.
My instincts are sort of more conservative than that. I feel like it's bad going in that direction, but then I also have to wrestle with the I guess type 2 thinking, wherein the things I enjoy now were once thought to be society wrecking, right?
Right.
So if unless it comes so fast and so swiftly that a lot of people who wouldn't consider themselves traditionalists are concerned about it, I wonder how compelling that really is, like a kind of a generalized nostalgic or traditionalist argument, you know?
Right. I mean, I think that that's a really good point that we already do live in a very artificial reality. And this is something that, well, I'm blanking on his name, but the guy who, Baudrillard, the guy who wrote Simulation and Simulacra, he talks about how, like, you know, if you think about like Los Angeles, like, okay, let's go to Disneyland in LA County, right? And I think it's in LA County, Anaheim. And I guess you're in Disneyland, and it's like a fake city. And but then like with like fake roads and fake houses and fake everything, when you step outside, you're no longer in Disneyland. You're in this thing called Los Angeles. And like that's a fake thing too. Like they're kind of fake streets. It's like a street that's an idea of a street that is all like that we created thousands of years ago, and we're still like kind of iterating upon this thing called the street. And all of reality is basically just that. We're creating a reality inside of a reality inside of a reality, all just based upon, you know, these notions of what a street through a forest used to be like. Right? A path that you'd walk down. And now it's like a freeway.
The only genuine street is some sort of beaten path through a forest. And then we've just been indulging in simulacra ever since, right?
And we just take this for granted. Everything that is in the world, like none of it is not touched by the human mind to have been molded in some fashion based on some you know vaguely artistic person's vision for how reality could be rather than how it is.
Yeah. Same. Yeah, Jean Baudrillard, I recall he was famous for the phrase "the Iraq War didn't happen" or something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
And do you recall what he meant by that exactly? Meaning, I think it means something like most people saw it on TV, they weren't there. I don't know. I feel like it's one of those sort of somewhat pulled out of context statements that ends up somehow giving off a false impression of an entire way of thinking.
Well, it's really interesting because you could do this, you could have the same argument. And I mean, I really like Baudrillard, but just because he gets you kind of thinking in the space of like, there's the world as it is, and then there's the world that like human minds and human media map onto that world. And there's always some little juxtaposition of, or, you know, there's fun things to talk about in that space when you start to think about it like that. So like you could argue with this kind of goofy logic of his that the coronavirus didn't happen. So like, for example,
I can see like some of the more materialist leftists would be upset with that kind of like, it's like an idea you've taken like one step too far, right? So the Iraq War definitely did happen. People died.
Exactly.
You know, politicians lied.
Yeah.
Sort of.
And coronavirus definitely did happen. Yeah, just to be clear. But you know, if you turn on Fox News, like your experience of reality is seeing a world where the coronavirus is some Chinese virus. You know, there's all these like these different things. So that's a thing. Like the Fox News coronavirus is a thing. The CNN coronavirus is actually a completely different thing, where you need to lock up your grandma and like be terrified and wear a mask at all times. You know, it's actually a different thing. So if you try to like say the coronavirus is one thing, no one knows what it is except for except for doctors, obviously, but like the average person has no idea what it is outside of how they consume it through media. And like, since I'm not going to go like get a magnifying glass and actually see what the virus is and know like what it does, my experience of it is literally what, you know, Bill Maher just said about it yesterday or whatever. That's what it is to me.
Yeah. The lockdown is real. The coronavirus is less real for me.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Now, this is when someone who goes, my husband or my partner is suffering from coronavirus right now. For me, it's very real. Like that's the trump card, so to speak, that one can use. But I would posit that for most people, lockdowns are way more real than coronavirus. It still hasn't consumed enough of the population such that it feels very real to people in the way that like, a heat wave or a, Superstorm Sandy feels or something like that.
Right. I mean, I think that like in a practical sense,
also natural.
Yeah, in a practical sense, it's good to have this conception in your mind to pull out of your pocket and analyze a situation with, just because it really highlights, and this is old news, but it really highlights that media has such a huge influence on how we view reality, and we shouldn't, we should be very careful what media we consume and what faith we put in it. And ideally, we'll be consuming a lot of media, because if you don't just live in the Fox News bubble or the CNN bubble, but you kind of live in both, you experience a lot of media, you listen to the scientists, you get the whole world, then you're kind of closer to, reality in some sense. I don't know if John
Yeah,
Baudrillard would
but
agree with that, but
and there's a side effect to that though, and is that you're sort of rendered a bit paralyzed. Uh, analysis paralysis, as they say, right? So I've noticed that the people who are sort of, there's a bit of good on left and right, there's a lot of lies left and right, and people who genuinely consume all of it, there's a strange overlap with people who consume none of it. People who are just immersed in just pure entertainment, follow the news. They're sort of equally cynical and undecided, but because one has consumed so much that each instance of consuming the other side renders the side information that you just previously consumed somewhat, it negates it to some degree. So there's this constant negation moving from one movie on a screen, as Scott Adams would put it, to the other movie on a screen, right? Like it makes you.
Yeah.
And then I guess that combined with a certain personality predisposition could lead you to think, well, be charitable to everybody, because we're all just trying to wade our way through the sea of information. Or it can say, you're all freaking crooked liars. I can't trust anybody, right? So a flood of information and partisan news sources combined with personality will lead you, I think, to a sort of a sense of crushing defeat and cynicism and a sense of being overwhelmed. Or it makes you just, hey, we should just acknowledge that there's too much to sift through, and it's too much for any human mind to grasp. The pace of information technology and its dissemination is outrunning our ability to process it effectively, really.